Do you believe that President Obama would willingly be letting them out if he genuinely had been advised these people are likely to kill Americans?
He was advised of that. The U.S. military has said they are at high risk of going back to the fight and killing Americans. So the U.S. military has said, in its official assessment of each one of these people, they are high risk for going back to the fight. So President Obama said that himself yesterday. He said, this is what happens at the end of wars. This is the talking point for the administration now. And he even said that George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and FDR all did the same thing. No, they didn't. When they released enemy prisoners, the enemy had surrendered. The war was over. They didn't return to the battlefield because there was no battlefield to return to. The Taliban has not surrendered. The war is not over. President Obama can wish the war to be over, but the enemy gets a vote. And the enemy has not surrendered. They're not willing to stop the war. They're going to keep fighting.
Is the war on terror over? Does the Taliban know that? Do these al-Qaeda affiliated guys, have they renounced their hatred for America and no longer want to participate in jihad? Because that would be major news, Mark. That would be major news.
Yeah. It would be. I'd love to. Maybe they've had a signing ceremony on the deck of the USS Missouri I didn't know about. But no, the Taliban has not stopped their war on America. Al-Qaeda has not stopped their war on America. These people are going to continue fighting and continue trying to kill Americans. And so we have given them 5 4-star generals.
Well, the White House reportedly criticizing Sergeant Bergdahl's former platoon members today for questioning this Bergdahl deal. Really? They don't get a say? Suggesting that these soldiers may be engaged in a political smear campaign. These guys were made to sign non-disclosure agreements. Now they're finally speaking their truth, and they're getting hit by the administration they serve? Congressman Duncan Hunter, a Marine combat vet, is next.
He did not serve the United States with honor. We all took an oath. He violated his oath when he deserted us and put other Americans in jeopardy.
You're going to hear from 2 of Bergdahl's unit leaders from Afghanistan. Now, they are now accusing their former platoon mate of being a deserter and possibly worse. And that's not all. The widow of a soldier who died while searching for Bergdahl, she is here to tell us her very emotional story. In addition, we'll check in tonight with Texas Senator Ted Cruz. He will respond directly to Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, who claims that Republicans are playing, quote, political games in the wake of this exchange. And then finally, our Middle East experts analyze some of the very questionable statements that were made in Arabic by Bob Bergdahl. That's the father of the released soldier. We begin tonight in Washington with Catherine Herridge is standing by with the very latest. Catherine.
Well, Sean, 6 months before this propaganda video was shot, a military intelligence source tells Fox News that a second option to free Bergdahl was pursued, which did not involve the swap of the 5 Taliban prisoners at Guantanamo Bay. U.S. personnel were tasked with setting up a dialogue with Pakistani leadership who have direct ties to the Taliban, and an option on the table was cash. But in December 2013, the military intelligence source says the team was told the administration wanted to pursue a prisoner swap and they should put their work on hold. U.S. intelligence officials say details of the swap were closely held by the Obama White House, and the intelligence community did not provide a formal assessment of the risk still posed by the Taliban prisoners. Today, the State Department did not dispute other options were considered, but said the final course of action was the preferred option.
I think, broadly speaking, we've considered all options to get him back. This was judged to be, again, recently, we believe, as General Dempsey said, this was the best, probably last chance to get him home.
And this apparent change in strategy last December, one where the focus was increasingly placed on a prisoner swap, is important to the timeline. It suggests the administration did have ample time to provide that 30-day congressional notification, and we know tonight that simply did not happen, Sean.
In effect, what you have is a caving to the Taliban's demands. From early on, these negotiations started back in November of 2010. The Taliban wanted basically a limit to counterterrorism operations on the ground in Afghanistan. They wanted a cessation, ultimately a cessation of hostilities more broadly, and they wanted these Taliban 5 back. And in recent days, it's become clear that they've gotten more or less what they wanted. If you look at the number of counterterrorism operations on the ground in Afghanistan, they have been significantly diminished since December of 2013. If you look further at drone strikes in Pakistan, none since December 25th of 2013. If you look at what the administration said, what the president said in his speech at West Point, he said basically he's going to the zero option after 2016, which means that there won't be any U.S. forces on the ground in Afghanistan, any combat forces on the ground in Afghanistan. And finally, of course, the Taliban Five, these much coveted senior Taliban commanders who worked closely with al-Qaeda, closely with the Iranian regime, closely with a number of those attacking U.S. soldiers in the days after 9/11, were released and sent to Qatar and eventually can make their way back to Afghanistan.
You know, this was supposed to be a sweet day for the president. He was literally meeting with the candy magnate who's now the president-elect of Ukraine. He's known as the Willy Wonka of that country. It was a chance for the president to try and show that maybe there's some positive news coming out of that troubled country. But as you know, this trip has been overshadowed by those allegations. He's been dogging him back home about whether he abused his power with this Taliban prisoner swap. Today, Republican Lindsey Graham was charging that this was all about the White House trying to get good PR for the president, waving the American flag in order to get an American soldier freed at all costs, while top allies to the president, Democrats on the Hill, as well as staffers inside the White House, tell me that is simply not true, that the only thing that motivated the president was trying to get an American soldier off the battlefield, and they say it's unseemly for Republicans to be attacking Mr. Bergdahl. Listen.
I think the White House was looking at a twofer to announce in 1 week that we're going to withdraw from Afghanistan, ending the longest war in U.S. history. And oh, by the way, as Commander-in-Chief, I secured the last captive of that war, the only captive of that war. That was thought in their mind, I think, to be a pretty good political story for that week. It blew up in their face.
Opponents of President Obama have seized upon the release of an American prisoner of war, that's what he was, using what should be a moment of unity and celebration of our nation as a chance to play political games.
Now, meanwhile, the administration is trying to clean up the latest Sunday morning slip-up from National Security Advisor Susan Rice, who was on ABC News over the weekend, claiming that Bergdahl served with, in her words, honor and distinction. An official in the White House telling Fox tonight that what she meant was that Bergdahl had volunteered for his country and had endured 5 years of captivity, and that Susan Rice was not trying to characterize in any way the circumstances around his capture. But the bottom line is that Sunday morning appearance again creating credibility questions for the administration about whether Susan Rice was again pushing a false narrative, Sean.
Ed, did Susan Rice and the president know that just about everybody in this platoon, some that were forced to sign confidentiality agreements, they reported to me, did they know that everybody in the platoon referred to him as a deserter and possibly even a traitor? Did they not know that? Chuck Hagel even said he didn't know that people died looking for Sergeant Bergdahl.
Top officials in the White House have told me that the president and Susan Rice were aware that there were allegations out there. And I think that what happened, as you piece this together, is that Susan Rice went a little bit further on the Sunday show than they had planned, that they knew there were allegations out there. They didn't know whether they were true or not. But you're right, there are certainly those allegations out there. I'm told the president, Susan Rice, they were aware of that. But nonetheless, for some reason, we don't know why, she went a little further than they were planning and suggested, look, he did serve with honor and distinction. That is obviously now blown up in their face.
All right, but we certainly know that they bypassed our military experts, our intelligence experts, and we know they bypassed Congress, so they had an agenda. They knew otherwise if they went to them, there'd be conflict, right?
Well, the bottom line is we know that going back as soon as 2011, they had brought this up on a bipartisan basis with top Democrats and Republicans on Capitol Hill. And yes, opposition was raised. Now, in fairness, there have been Republicans like John McCain in recent months who have suggested go forward with the prisoner swap. We've got to get Bo Bergdahl. But nonetheless, the terms of this were very controversial, and you would expect they would have run that past the Congress. More than anything, that's what the law says they had to do, Sean.
All right. My next guest is reporting tonight that the Obama administration, that in fact they did go to great lengths to circumvent internal objections to the Bergdahl prisoner exchange. Here to explain more, Time Magazine senior correspondent Massimo Calabresi is with us. Massimo, thank you for being with us. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm fine.
I read your report, and what Ed was reporting here, they did bypass Congress, they did bypass the intelligence community, and the argument was that the State Department and the White House, to quote the article in Time Magazine, argued that the military should, quote, suck it up and salute. That was their attitude towards our military's thoughts on this?
So there's a long history to these 5 Taliban leaders and the discussions over whether and under what conditions they should be released. people involved in those debates over time characterized the ultimate decision to overrule objections in the Pentagon and the intelligence community as effectively sending that message, suck it up and salute. It's a contentious issue, and frankly, there are a lot of questions still out there, especially about the terms of the release that we still haven't gotten to.
All right, but let's go specifically into this phrase, quote, suck it up and salute. Where did that phrase come from in your reporting?
So that's a U.S. Military official involved in the debate over whether to release the Taliban 5.
And that, I'm having a hard time understanding. So they bypassed Congress, they bypassed the intelligence community, that because in the past, you're right, the history is accurate, Massimo, and that is that they did not want this to happen because they rightly believed that these 5 would go back into the battlefield and would be a threat to Americans, which Jay Carney denied, and yet the president had to acknowledge. But isn't that kind of a kick in the face to our military members just for offering their opinion that's contrary to the administration and the State Department?
There's no question that the intelligence community and the Pentagon previously succeeded in blocking the release of these 5 men from Guantanamo Bay over top secret and secret intelligence indicating that they would be a threat.
I didn't know that the community organizer had such a vast military experience that he's going to tell our military leaders.
It's not him. It's Article 2 of the It's the Article 2 of the Constitution. He's the commander-in-chief.
Well, he is a commander-in-chief, but the Constitution is our rule of law, and the rule of law was very clear that he had to seek out and inform Congress 30 days prior, something that he didn't do, right?
Well, that is a long and rich legal debate in our country's history. Jack Goldsmith, who
Jay Carney, I have tape of Jay Carney saying that was his interpretation of the law when asked about it a number of times.
I'll go with Harvard professor Jack Goldsmith, who was the last word on legal matters in the Bush administration, who said, if the president is refusing to comply with a law that is unconstitutional, he then is acting under the law of the United States.
I'll go with George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley, who was on the show last night, that says this president has pushed our Constitution to the tipping point because he doesn't obey the laws that are passed, and we do have something called separation of powers and co-equal branches of government. But Massimo, appreciate it. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
And joining me now with more reaction on this, Fox News strategist and military analyst, Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters. Why would the president, do you not find that an insult that their reference to State Department and the White House to the military and our intelligence community is suck it up and salute? I find it pretty insulting.
Well, you know, the truth is our military is willing to suck up a lot. We've sucked up Iraq, we've sucked up Afghanistan, and God bless all those veterans out there who've been through that. But when it comes to something that has to do with our national security, with letting go 5 of the world's worst terrorists for what basically is a publicity stunt.
Let's say it.
Yeah, certainly. An alleged deserter, and clearly to get the VA scandal off the headlines. Well, that did work. That worked, and also to help close down Gitmo. I mean, it's so shabby that the military would have been derelict in its duty if it had gone silently into that good night. But you know, it's tough because the Hagel Pentagon is just at 6s and 7s. It's an absolute mess. Sean, I was appalled today when Hagel in Europe came out and said, well, we mustn't prejudge. I call him Private Bergdahl. I don't accept the promotion to Sergeant Private Bergdahl. Well, maybe he should have said that to Obama and the White House and Susan Rice before they tried to foist this guy on the American public as a hero. And even beyond that, Hagel had the audacity to say, well, there's no conclusive evidence that the 6 soldiers who died looking for Bergdahl died because they were looking for Bergdahl. That it contradicts what the soldiers on the ground saw and heard and lived and said. And it goes back to the State Department loony flunky yesterday claiming that she knew better from Foggy
I know, I
Bottom,
couldn't
Washington,
believe
D.C.
it.
She knew better than the soldiers on the ground. The soldiers on the ground in the fight always know better than Washington flunkies.
Yeah, and that was a disgraceful moment. What you're referring to, the spokesman questioning the validity of those that actually served and knew what had actually happened, some of whom were forced to sign a non-disclosure